Hello, I'm Dan Perry and this is my Masters of Science dissertation, The Hiding Curriculum Towards the Development of LGBTQ+ Curriculum in Higher Education, Chapter 2, Welcome to the Innovative World Order, Coming to a Mainstream Near You, or Potential Ways of Resisting Normalizations in Higher Education. This presentation is called Communities of Practice and is the final tentacle of Chapter 2 to the overview. This presentation is divided up into four titles. These are Situated Learning, Legitimate Peripheral Participation, Communities of Practice and Power, Identity and Communities of Practice, Learning Architectures, Queering Communities of Practice and Mobilization, and sorry it's just gone slightly over my camera there, but Academic Space, Learning, Architectures and Communities of Practice. Communities of Practice was first discussed in Laban Wenger's 1991 book Situated Learning, Legitimate Peripheral Participation. It explored ideas and observations of apprentices and informal learning communities. Wenger, 1998, further developed the study in Communities of Practice, Learning, Meaning, Identity. Situated learning was used as a term they felt, that is, Laban Wenger, was more inclusive and minimised the discussion around formal education, believing it was intentional instruction and not inclusive of all forms of learning. Laban Wenger believed that a community of practice is a group of people who share a common profession. To gain access to the community of practice, one is required to have a legitimate peripheral participation, which is a sense of belonging in the group. Legitimate peripheral participation will now be continued as LPP for short. Lave and Wenger, 1991, acknowledged that LPP is a complex concept with power constructs, relation between master and apprentice, identities negotiated, and artifacts that stories are created from. However, Community of Practice, or COP, relies on groups that have been established for some time, as it requires experienced practitioners in the community for LPP to occur. Wenger, 1998, developed the idea of communities of practice in a further study, Communities of Practice, Learning, Meaning, Identity. Wenger, 1998, explains that the ideas of identity and community were not adequately explored in his and Lave's previous study, which I just mentioned, back in 1991. Wenger develops an expanded social learning theory which combines collectivity, power relations, meaning and tasks, subjectivity, social structures, practice, identity, and situated learning. Wenger develops ideas particularly on identity and community because they play a key role in community formation and less on the ideas of legitimate peripheral participation. Wenger's expanded model is vital to theorizing the social order of learning-based theory. He explains that communities of practice are familiar to everyone as we take part in them every day, but we don't realize it. I believe queer communities of practice could be cultivated in higher education classrooms through learning architectures. Tommen's 2018 describes a learning architecture as tensions between four dualities. These are reification and participation, designed and emergent, local and global, and finally identification and negotiability. I consider that these tensions could be formed by carefully selecting LGBTQ issues and developing curriculum which would create these tensions. However, I believe that the classroom in higher education, which is situated in a neoliberal system, would greatly impact on the development of community of practice in a negative way, as it would focus on economic gain. This is where queer communities of practice would come in. But first, I want to have a quick note on learning architectures and space, which will then lead us into my final chapter, my final major chapter, I should say. Soltani 2018 explores academic social space and how this may assist a community of practice developing. Academic social space is in between a physical and mental space where academic socialization occurs. It's important to keep in mind the effects of this space could have on a learner, as they will relate it to an experience of similar spaces onto the current space. So I'm just going to quickly explain this because that's not very clear. So when you enter a university, maybe you've been away from education for a while. When you go back into a classroom, you usually have the teacher at the front and then, mainly talking. This could trigger memories of your early school days where you might have had a negative experience. You could have had a positive experience. And basically by re-entering this formatted space, it will affect the way you are in that space. And I think that's how I'd explain that. However, much like communities of practice, learners will have to negotiate their identities, which is kind of what I was saying just previously there, but through interaction within the space instead of within a group, although that would be part of it as well. It's therefore important to make the space as friendly and as welcoming as possible to ease this negotiation and aid legitimate peripheral participation. I always struggle with that. LPP. Soltani also explores the role of technology and how this may facilitate entry into community of practice. However, caution should be used with technology as it may create barriers in adult learners who are not computer literate. Thank you for joining me. I hope this section has given a better idea of communities of practice. How this could be queered, though, well, that's a gap I've left open to let you think over and respond to. As Soltani has suggested, in order to build communities of practice, there needs to be a space to do this. In my final major chapter, we return to capitalist neoliberalism and drill down even further into it. Look forward to seeing you again for the third chapter, Get a Room, the deconstruction of neoliberal capitalism, queer anarchists, sexual citizenship, queer temporary autonomous zones, and higher education. And our first section is called Neoliberal Capitalist Hegemonic Monolith Construction and Deconstructions. Yes, they're a massive mouthful and sound really complex, but all will be explained. Ho ho ho. See you next time.